How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, as we cover the Nancy Guthrie case, as you start to see in media coverage, social media coverage, that it is lessening. Few leads are coming in that are viable leads outside of what the media or these online sleuths just put out there just to get attention on the channel. I do believe the media will start going their own way, which is a good thing because I think the media was a concern in this case. I think the media could have destroyed a lot of areas where law enforcement could have the element of surprise. We saw that with definitely some coverage with a very well-liked news reporter. I won't say his name, but with that said, you're putting too much out there during an active, possible hostage situation. So what we're going to do today is try to reiterate some of the facts that are out there, try to see if we can create a different perspective. Again, it's not about us knowing the answer, but rather, are we asking the right questions? That's why I got Russ on. We're going to try to see if we could discern any good questions that have yet to be answered. But sadly, I'm not saying the case is going cold, but it's definitely cooling down. Russ, what's your thoughts? I mean, she pretty much went missing, reported missing February 1st. We're now at February 28th, and we're really kind of stuck on what happened that night. And to be honest with you, the only definitive facts we have really is that night, from the surveillance camera and the digital forensic. Everything else outside of that we know of has really just been speculation. So we're going to kind of really focus on, what we know. That's the key here. But what's your thoughts, Russ, so far?
So I think that, there's been a rush by the media to always try and be first. I think that that's been extremely counterproductive to the investigation itself. They turned the whole thing into a circus where there were just, cars there day after day after day. And certainly that was something that law enforcement had to deal with rather than, actually dealing with the crime itself. I think that, now we're moving into a new phase, and this new phase may or may not bear fruit, but this is really, the long haul part of that.
And I love what you said about the media always wanting to be first. I know we've discussed it before about either creating or maintaining a narrative and just running with it, because they know if that narrative gets them views, they're going to continue to push that narrative. And I've seen that now that I've been covering a lot more true crime. If they have a narrative that they feel, it doesn't even have to be based on fact. They will find ways through imaginary sources to go ahead and push that narrative, and then it just becomes more confusing. I've seen it with the D4VD case. We're seeing it here a little bit. It just becomes so confusing when I think the people that even stuff like us online, we have a responsibility. And I think that responsibility is, if we decide to do that, is to, yes, provide our experience, expertise, of course, but make sure that people understand that we're not here to make up stuff or run with updates just to get the views. Whatever we're trying to do is to try to bring some clarity. And the moment we start bringing more confusion, we need to step back, because we're ultimately not just responsible for the message that we give out, but we're responsible for how that message is delivered and who it gets delivered to. I think that's very important. So Nancy Guthrie has been missing since the night of January 31st and was reported missing on February 1st. So we're now nearly 1 month into this case with no arrest, no confirmed motive, no proof of life, and no body. That's tough, guys, by the way. We've seen this in some cases before, and then what happens here is circumstantial evidence carries a lot of weight at this point. Savannah Guthrie has publicly acknowledged her mother may already be gone, and investigators are preparing to or have begun returning the house to the family. So again, we know that she was last seen about 9:48 p.m., January 31st, reported missing around 12:03 p.m., February 1st. Doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47 a.m., and pacemaker app lost contact at 2:28 a.m. Evidence: you got blood on the porch confirmed as Nancy's, doorbell camera removed, and clear signs she was taken against her will. and then tens of thousands of tips, hundreds of investigators, massive media, but almost a month later, still no named suspect. All right, Russ, so the first question we got here is, when a case this high profile goes almost a month with this level of resources and still no named suspect, is that more likely a sign of a lucky perpetrator, a skilled one, or a fumbled investigation?
I don't want to go so far as to say it's a fumbled investigation for this simple reason. You can only do so much with the evidence that is at hand. When you have a limited amount of evidence, there's just a potential for nothing to come forward. When you're absolutely inundated with evidence, as in this case, sifting through it becomes really problematic. I think that the idea that this is someone skilled is really undercut by what we saw in the video. You have an individual who comes up and, oh, there's a camera, I better do something about that. They're not prepared for that. They go and they fumble with some shrubbery. I think that that part of what went on here was a lack of any type of thinking and follow through by this individual or individuals, in that what they simply did is they just went up there and they kind of hodgepodge the whole thing together. So I don't think it's that. I think that you could throw the modifier lucky on there, but I think it just came down to they came in, they did what they did, they left some evidence, so that doesn't show that they were really planning, but they weren't there for very long. What could anyone be expected perhaps to do with that limited pool of evidence there? So if we want to put luck on it, I would say more lucky than anything else. I know that everyone is talking about it being a fumbled investigation, and that may absolutely be true, but there's only kind of like this big hindsight bias. Oh, they should have done this and they should have done that. And I see a bunch of experts on the internet saying all kinds of crazy things, and I don't even want to go into them all, because it's just there's they started out with, oh, it's someone in the family, and there's people that are still stuck on that. And they haven't moved on from that in spite of the fact that they've been cleared. And it just became this great circus. I'll leave you with this one thought, is that in this case and many others, clickbait became the coin of the realm.
I agree with that. And I want to mention something. So, me and Russ work in corrections, and we don't deal with problems that are difficult. We deal with problems that are complex. And what I mean by that is difficult problems, whether you answer it today or answer it tomorrow, the answer is usually the same. They're just difficult to get to, but the answers are still the same. Complex problems are fluid problems. That's how I interpret it. Problems that just grow in complexity because you have to make decisions and you have to act, because in the end, you can't just hope that the answer that you're looking for is always going to be the same. In this case here, they walked into a very, very fluid and active situation, a possible, I'm going to say definitive abduction, definitely, possible kidnapping, and whatever the motive was that pushed for this to happen, whether it was a planned kidnapping, which, could be, but where's the communication, or a botched robbery, in which they got panicked because they thought they could have been discovered. So they take Nancy. I mean, whatever the arguments would be, the point is you're dealing with stuff that's fluid and in motion and in motion. The last thing I feel that you want out there is for the media to start kind of throwing stuff out there with their own interpretation, because they do. You guys got to rewatch these videos and look for small little subtleties of influence in the dialogue. And this is what me and Russ are very good at, because we work around manipulators all the time, and trust and believe there's certain weight with certain words that they put there strategically to either create or maintain a perspective. when you have a case like this, and I'm sure Russ would agree, that involves multiple agencies, you are going to have conflict. But conflict in context, could be a beautiful thing. It means that we're all not stuck in groupthink. We're all working together to try to hit up all angles. And conflict, as I always say, even in the correction side, when you're managing things and you got to oversee so many different departments, because at a certain level, I could definitely connect to overseeing multiple departments trying to work together as one. Conflict rooted in trust is where growth happens. It's where we allow ourselves to see a greater picture and provide different angles. But ultimately, there's got to be trust. Now, when they said that at the very beginning, maybe there was a fumble investigation, they start attacking Pima County or the relationship with the feds, and they keep on highlighting conflict. Conflict, it may not be to the point where, we're resistant towards each other or we're competitive towards each other, because I don't know if that was the case here. It could just mean that we may have two different perspectives and we're trying to figure out the route to get there. And that means we may not always have agreement. There are times me and Russ are on the show, we may not always have agreement, but that doesn't mean that we lose alignment. That doesn't mean that at the end of the day, we're so resistant to each other's perspective that we're not going to work for each other. We're not going to help each other reach whatever that perspective may be, even if it's just to exhaust it. And I feel when the media puts it out there, the media makes it look like there's so much conflict that people are working on separate angles. They're not working together. They're resistant. They're competitive, whatever it is. And now at the end of the day, the person that suffers the most would be Nancy and her family. But sometimes if you have healthy conflict that's not rooted in competition, resistance, etc., the case, the investigation is better for it, because it's allowing for the freedom to people to speak their mind and have that avenue exhausted. So again, it's not about agreement. It's about acceptance and alignment. I think they took the word conflict, Russ, and the media made it really look like in the context there, we got resistance and in some level competition between the two lead investigation agencies.
I think just whether that's true or not, they made it out to be something that it wasn't, and I think that's the shortest explanation for what was going on. Whatever was happening there, it was either created by the media or the flames of it were fanned by the media, and they certainly twisted it to fit whatever their particular warped narrative was or is.
Right. Now, I wanted to add some thoughts here related to that question that we asked, where if some signs that this was someone experienced. Okay, so now I want to ask Russ this before I go into these signs. Sometimes people paint the extreme that either they're experienced or inexperienced, sophisticated or not sophisticated. I mean, is it possible that both truths can coexist at the same time? Right, Russ? We would say yes, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's always going to be dichotomies, but the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I mean, it's just that simple.
So we have there. Okay, so signs this was someone experienced. Okay, so let's start there first. We got prior appearance at the door, masked suspect image without backpack captured on an earlier date, suggesting a prior approach or dry one. We don't know the date, but a lot of people believe it was January 11th, because that's a date that people were asking for. So it could have had someone casing. I mean, a lot of so if you lean into that, and that does connect, because there's a lot of evidence they believe that may connect that picture to someone coming casing the location. Okay, that could be a sign that there's some experience there, some pre-planning. Then you have the timing window, likely taken in the early morning hours of February 1st, after the 1:47 a.m. disconnect and before the late morning welfare check. Then you got camera awareness, because he tried to obscure the Nest camera with vegetation, then removed it. Minimal public digital trail, so no publicly identified phone, vehicle, or financial trail yet that we know of. Clean extraction to some extent outside of a few drops of blood. Nancy, her connected devices, and the camera are gone. Mostly blood and mixed DNA remain. And former deputy He said that this is Eric Maldonado. He says the abductor is either really smart or really lucky and may have had some help. So, Russ, if you look at the prior visit, I think this is it, right? Looking at the prior visit, the timing, and the way the camera was handled, does this read as someone with criminal experience, someone who researched how to do this, or someone with specific knowledge of Nancy's habits?
So I think that this is one point at which, the media really got in the way of what was actually happening. If there was a prior visit, and there's all kinds of indicators now that perhaps there wasn't, because at least the stuff that I've seen so far never really put it in that context. So, so if there was a prior visit, how come they didn't know about the camera? If there was a prior visit, what was, actually going on then? They didn't know how to do what, how to surveil the area. They didn't know how to, gain intelligence. They just kind of like showed up and looked around. So first of all, I don't buy into the idea. And I could have missed it somewhere, but, I saw several stories afterwards that said, no, there was no prior visit. So, I think that this is one of those things that the takeaway is nil, because there's really not enough information out there to know whether or not this actually occurred. And then secondly, you have to be really careful about what you accept from the media. Because they're in it to get clickbait. So you come upon a photo that's released after the main video, and what do you do with it? Oh, you blow it up into something that it's not. So I think that overall it looked like whoever was there wasn't ready for the things that were going on. It looked very Keystone criminal to me.
Right. So two things. So right now, the most recent things is they still believe, you're right, it hasn't been confirmed, but they still believe that there could have been a prior visit because law enforcement sources told Fox News Digital one of the FBI released nest images, the one without the backpack, was captured on a different date than the others, including the masked suspect likely scouted at the home in advance. We don't have a date. People are thinking it's January 11th because at the very beginning, law enforcement was asking if anybody had images or stuff. They did I think what they did was they did the whole month, or whatever it is, just to kind of cover themselves. But then they wind up doing something more specific, and they did ask for January 11th. ABC News and other outlets similarly report, citing unnamed sources, that the suspect appears to have visited the house before February 1st with the no backpack image believed to be from that earlier encounter. And these reports are still being repeated in current coverage. They have not been retracted by those outlets. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has pushed back on the certainty, like you said, Russ, of the prior visit claim in their official statement. They emphasize that the publicly released images lack date and timestamps, and say that any claim about different days is purely speculative for the public because those timestamps are part of the investigative record, not the release screenshot. So, again, if that picture is a true picture, you don't know. That could be the same picture of the same day with the suspect without his backpack on, if it's a real picture. So behind the scenes, multiple law enforcement sources have told national outlets that at least one image is from an earlier date, and that investigators do believe a prior approach is likely. On the record, though, Pima County publicly says the images as released don't have timestamps, so the public can't verify which is from which day, and they're not willing to confirm the prior visit narrative in official statements yet. So there's some confusion there. But I wanted to show you something, Russ. This is where I see something different. I'm gonna pull out the surveillance footage, and I don't know. So a lot of people saying that they didn't know the camera was there. I don't see that. This is what I see, and I want to show you something, Russ, but it can go both ways because we discussed this. But this is what I see. Remember, guys, it's pitch black. Okay, it's pitch black. So he walks up this, he's gonna walk up. Wait, where's the beginning? I need to walk up the stairs too. Is there a beginning here? They missed it. Where's the beginning? Hold on one second, guys. I need one with a little a better beginning than that. That's not the. Maybe it's this one. Let's try this one. Where's my beginning? Where's my beginning, man? Where he walks up the. Let me try this one.
So we have an image here.
Hold on. I had the beginning when he walks up the stairs, guys. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it now because I want to. Let me try this one. Last one. I don't know what's going on. I'm missing the beginning. Well, let me go back to the other video then. But when he walks up the stairs, he has his head down. I mean, there could be two things you're looking at there, right, Russ? There could be it's totally dark that he doesn't know where he's stepping, or he could be looking to dodge the camera. But here's my thing here. Let me play this right here. When he's walking, I think he misjudges where he's at. And I think he knows that there's a camera there, and he's getting ready to, he thinks the camera's in front of him, and it's not. And then he goes to where the camera is because he kind of feels his way. So look, I think he knows that there's a camera there, but I think he's a bit off. I don't think the camera's a surprise to him. Watch. He sees the camera, and he's trying to get at it. I know a lot of people think, oh, he was going to knock on the door, and that could be the case, which I don't know who's going to knock on the door to mask like that and expect someone to answer the door unless, he takes off the mask and she identifies who it is and lets him in. I don't see her open the door to someone like that. And you got to assume maybe she has a peephole or she can access her Ring camera and sees her in the front of her house. I think he's looking for the camera and he misjudges it. Oh, it's over there. Okay. And then he starts blocking it because that was his goal, because his hand is already up as he gets closer to the door. And then he's just looking for the camera. So he knows there's a camera there. Would you agree?
No, because of the way he handles the whole thing. To me, this is him going, oh, there's a camera there. And then he has nothing in his hands to try and take care of the camera. And then he spends all this time Mickey Mousing around the outside and getting shrubs and coming back and trying to place them over. This is to me, low level thinking. This is thinking on the fly. If he knew the camera was there, how come he didn't come up with something in his hands ready?
Because Russ, it hasn't been touched for a while. But remember, they believe that the power was taken out before he went on the. Did that ever change? They said a local Facebook post.
They came back and said that the power outage wasn't a power outage. They said that it was the disconnect. It was the disconnect from the pacemaker to the base unit. So
they said that there was.
We don't really know, but if you're saying, okay, he's smart enough to know where to go to disconnect the power, but he doesn't.
No, Russ, they're saying that there was a power outage that they may have affected the house, and they haven't. And I think that they did the power outage, and then he went on hoping that the camera wasn't working. That may be one thing that he wasn't prepared for, but there's nothing that says that the power outage never happened.
Okay, well, I'm not saying the power outage didn't happen, but if we assume that it did, why is he still not ready to deal with the camera?
No, he just may not see where the camera is. Maybe they did the power outage to disconnect. Let me just see if the power, because that matters. If there was a power outage that affected the whole house, he probably thought it was safe at that point. Maybe that's a little bit of lack of pre-planning. But there's no power, so I'll just walk up the stairs and then I'll just take care of the camera. And then maybe that is kind of a last-minute thought. But it says that what's documented as a brief outage blackout event tied to the area and to devices, not a detailed electrical map of every circuit in the home. So that really hasn't. So it could go either way with us, Russ, because it could be your way too. I get it. But if he did do a power outage and it did, and he thought it did affect the house, then there's a good chance that he walks up to the camera and. But I do think he knows that camera's there. I think he looks at it clearly. He's looking for it, tries to cover it up. I don't think the camera's a surprise to him. I don't think, but it could either way. But there was a point where they were talking about a power outage, and I'm thinking, well, if there was a power outage, then maybe he thought that he could just go up the stairs and not be seen, and then, get a little sloppy with it. Because here's the funny thing is a lot of people thought that he was getting ready to knock. He's not getting ready to knock. I think he misplaced where he was at because it's so black, and he misplaced where he was at in relationship to the door and the Nest camera. But it could go the other way too. I'm leaning on. I don't know. It was never definitive with the power outage, that was a big thing when this case started. They had a timeline with the power outage. I was involved in that, and all of a sudden, that disappeared. You know, that disappeared. So was the power outage something that affected? I pictured someone maybe cutting the power and then trying to get into the house. Okay, so signs that this was someone unsophisticated. So this kind of leans towards more with Russ, or are they just lucky? Some behaviors appear clumsy, which is why experts split on the profile. Weapon carry, handgun seemingly carried in a holster in front of the groin, not typical of a trained, seasoned offender. Bulky gloves, large ski-style gloves instead of snug tactical gloves. Exposed features, visible facial hair, and distinct clothing despite a mask. Clumsy camera cover, like Russ said, fumbling with vegetation and glove instead of quickly disabling the camera. And glove with DNA nearby. Similar glove found about 2 miles away with an unknown male DNA profile, but we still don't even, that's where the genealogy stuff's going to have to start coming in. So, all right, Russ. So question 3 is we have credible experts calling this offender both sophisticated and non-sophisticated, can both be true. A planner who executed badly. We kind of touched on this. And how does that hybrid profile shape how you hunt for this person? That part we didn't cover.
So there's a difference between someone who has experience doing crimes and someone who attempts a crime and fumbles through it. And they're certainly not mutually exclusive. I have people on my caseload that have been involved in all kinds of horrible things and in all kinds of, break-ins and entries and commercial burglaries and everything else. And, the one thing, that constantly comes back to me when I see these kind of things is they have, they're just simply not risk averse. They're willing to go in there. They're willing to take the risk. And then sometimes they get away and sometimes they don't. People that, in my opinion, that assign, too much, planning and sophistication and everything else to this person, have an unreasonable expectation about what's possible in most cases. So, usually what we see in similar, although there's very few analogs actually to this case, is that, the FBI or the locals, they grind away until they get a followable lead and then they capitalize on it. And so in this case, a lot of the people that I know, they were just, counting on sheer luck to begin with because they're not risk averse. If you start assigning the way you would go about it in this and your ideas about what's possible, it's not the same as your basic low-level criminal.
Yeah, and guys, I want to add something here. So it says the footage itself. So with the him going to the door, if the camera exists, if he knows the camera exists, it says what the video shows. They say the footage itself and expert commentary make it very clear that they believe he knew the camera was there. In the Nest doorbell footage, the masked suspect walks up to the front door, looks directly at or checks the camera, then steps back, bends down, picks up vegetation from the yard, and uses it to cover the lens. But the question is, did he know the camera was there beforehand? Before using the leaves, he appears to try to block the lens with his gloved hand, then adjusts and grabs a plant, a very specific effort to obstruct the camera rather than just ignoring it. CNN analysts note that he recognizes the camera and tries multiple ways to obscure it, which raises questions about his level of sophistication and planning. One expert told CNN, "This looks highly premeditated yet very poorly executed," meaning he clearly knew the camera was there and planned to deal with it, even if he chose a clumsy method, which instead of using tools. But there was another breakdown by Tony Bruschi and Bob Mata, who described the likely sequence as this: maybe, and this may be from Hidden Killers, their show Hidden Killers. He came once, saw the camera, got spooked, and returned later with the plan to cover it with weeds. I mean, either way, I think that's the part that makes us a bit confused. I think that's the part where you see some level of sophistication and unsophistication, or just all happening at once. Some level of experience and inexperience all happening at once. And I think that's what became very confusing for a lot of people that were watching this, because the fact, like Russ said, goes the vegetation part. If he would have, I still think he's looking for the camera just in the darkness. If he would have been able to dismantle that camera from the door without going back to the vegetation, you would the plants, you would honestly see someone that's a little bit more sophisticated. It's the fact that he couldn't get the camera off and that he went to get the plants, and then also how he's holding his gun is a little unique. So let's see. I wanted to mention something too. Me and Russ were going to do a profile, breaking down, who we think could have done it, trying to do a profile. And it was difficult. But one thing that we learned is the first thing you do when it comes to profiling is you look at the victim and the circumstances. But with the victim, you try to see if they're high risk or low risk. And I thought this was confusing because technically you would consider Nancy Guthrie low risk because she doesn't live a lifestyle that would involve her in situations where she would become high risk, like no different than let's say a bit different than a runaway or someone who's into drugs, who constantly interacts with that side of the world, the side of drug dealers and the criminal element, if you will, because that definitely, if you're in drug use, you start involving yourself with the criminal element. But there is a level of high risk because there's some notoriety connected to her through her daughter. But with that said, what makes this difficult is I think there is a blending of both. Russ, right? You think there's a blending of someone who could be seen as just an older woman living on her own in the middle of nowhere, that we just have no idea what happened to her. So obviously there's no closure even for the public as well, because how could this happen? Because there's a couple of ways here. You could look at it like, how could this happen to an old woman in her home who is in the middle of nowhere, who doesn't put herself at risk or anything like that? So we can't put it together. So then the first thing you do is, well, let's look at everybody that's around her, because she doesn't put herself in a risky situation. So the first thing everybody starts doing is, when there's limited to no risk, you look at everybody that's the closest to them, because that's what makes the biggest sense, because they're not bringing in anything external that can cause a greater risk to their lives. But when those efforts get exhausted, and sadly they may have been, we don't know, because that's why I think people have trouble going back and forth, is because if it's not someone inside the circle, what the hell could she have done that brings something from outside the circle to her? So a lot of people keep on going back to, it's got to be the family, or it's got to be someone connected to the property. But then you have Savannah Guthrie, you have her line of work, maybe some level of political beliefs. Could that put a risk on her that could bring in something external that we may never know? I mean, Russ, I think that the key to solving this, or the key to understanding somewhat if this is going to be solved, is if there's a connection to her circle, then maybe it's just a matter of getting the evidence and bringing and connecting it to this inner circle. But if it truly is a stranger concern where you don't know, then you have to you need some level of motive to even know where to begin, because this is not someone here that would have that type of risk that would automatically lead you to believe that it's got to be these external things. So now if you don't have anything that directs you to that, how do you find that?
I think that, when you look at the totality, there's a lot of different ways that these individuals that did this could have, got to that point. My own particular view is that she was targeted, and this was done for kidnapping in order to generate a ransom, and that it went horribly bad. So how does someone come across her as a victim? Well, when you have a lot of low-level criminals in an area like that, and there's certainly a lot of them in Pima County, people talk and other people listen, and then someone starts to get an idea, and they know that this person has been talked about in their presence, maybe even from one of these workers that was out there without the workers even being involved. Hey, I got a good payday on plugging into some kind of electrical or doing landscaping or whatever, and people listen to this, and then they just do a modicum of homework, and they get to a point where, hey, there's some kind of, meth-fueled great idea that we're going to go in there and this is going to be our big payday. So there's a lot of ways that she gets to be a victim with regards to this. One of the things that, I see in my participants, let's just put it that way, a lot is, they get some type of exposure to a situation where they know about some money, they know about some goods, and then they just put themselves in a place to leverage that and, rip people off or go in and do a commercial burglary. And it's just all this kind of, word of mouth. They listen to things and then they go and they act on them in relatively short time frames, because that is the way they work. And, that's why people should always be very careful when they're discussing their finances or discussing a new car that they bought or anything else, because you never know who ends up with that information. And then because they're local and you're accessible, you become a statistic after that.
Yeah, and guys, I agree with that, Russ. That's good advice there. Also, I want to mention the circle. If you got Nancy, which could have a very controlled circle, and they go ahead and they exhaust efforts to see that limited circle, you got to eventually, if you can't connect it to any type of risk that she could put herself in, again, an 84-year-old woman in the middle of nowhere, then you got to increase the circle, and then you got to look at the circles of other people. And one of them would be Savannah's circle, and that circle's got to be huge. And I think that makes it what could be extremely complex if that's a route. That's why motive matters. That's why, to be honest with you, if they thought it was a kidnapping, that engagement that need to happen would have been something that could at least provided some more clarity, so they know where they could look. They never had that engagement. So let's say there was a kidnapping, because we know there was an abduction. Let's say there was a kidnapping. Did they kidnap Nancy Guthrie, or did they kidnap Savannah's mother? Yeah, that's a perspective. That because now if it's about Nancy Guthrie, then maybe it's someone that doesn't even know who Savannah is. And now we have to try to go back into Nancy's routine and discover where in her routine did she become vulnerable or gave out information she shouldn't have given out. Or if it's the daughter of Savannah, now we got to focus more on Savannah's routine, Savannah's interactions, or however, whichever route that goes. But the point is, it's not all eyes on Nancy either. It's all eyes on any kind of social network that could somehow directly or indirectly be connected to Nancy.
I was going to say, Nancy Guthrie, for better or worse, did have an online presence. She had her own website. She was actively engaged in selling books. She was actively engaged in giving at least where her general presence was located. And so, that makes for an idea for someone who's, looking her up and thinking about doing something, whether it's a burglary or a kidnapping. This could have been something that evolved. Maybe originally they were just going to go in and, try and rip her off. But then, at some point they said, hey, why get some trinkets when we can, make a life-changing score? And so, being able to, look up her website and, see, yes, she does live in our area, and any number of things can be the thing that fuels the response towards, actually formulating a plan.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. If she did have that's another thing. So she has an increased network as well. So I mean, again, it's not easy because of that social media presence. So then you got the signs. Let's go to the investigation has had problems. So early decisions may have helped the offender and give defense attorney angles. Very early scene release. And by the way, this was all pushed to the public by the media, by the way. So we have to always add that within context. One, the information that's put out there. Two, I would guess my biggest priority be the elimination of surprise that law enforcement will have. So we got something that can trace pacemakers, or looks like they're getting ready to go to this house here. What are we doing? And how do we get to a point that we not see that as being wrong, but not just wrong, foolish, absolutely foolish. Very early scene release, house effectively released within about a day. Non-investigators entered while blood was still visible. Sheriff later said he probably could have held off. Okay, good. There's a mission there. On-off scene control. So sealed, unsealed, re-entered multiple times. Now, guys, this is when you're putting a case together, this is the stuff that is on the prosecution side. But the funny thing is, and I noticed this in other cases, yes, you want to prepare a case the moment you start the investigation, because all that matters, the due process, all that matters. But remember, there's a priority here. They don't know where Nancy is. That's the thing. It's not. It's a bit different here. They don't know where Nancy is. So part of it is, maybe eventually preparing a case down the line. But I would think the bigger priority is we need evidence to find out where Nancy is. And if those two have conflict and they can't coexist, then I'm going to be honest with you. The effort to go for Nancy and try to get her within reason will supersede anything that could lead to a prosecution, because at this point the priority is going to be the preservation of life. So you have two things that are trying to coexist with could be within some level of conflict. Then you got the doorbell footage confusion. I'm sorry. Delayed thermal searches. That was true. Heat sensing aircraft not available for several hours, posing some politics with the pilot. Doorbell footage confusion. Initially said Nest video was unavailable. Only later did FBI recover it. FBI friction and lab choice possible, but I don't know if it was as I'm going to put it in there, but I don't know if it was as extreme as the public made it out to be, or as the media made it out to be. But some online entity routers reported tension over evidence access and lab selection, which became a big discussion through all this. Former deputies critique. Maldonado called early release way too soon and extra gloves so unprofessional. And then the Sergeant Cross on limits of transparency. There was a sergeant that was interviewed on a show I watch, and he talks about the limits of transparency. In his interview, Sergeant Aaron Cross stresses they cannot publicly share certain details, warrants, suspect lists, specific evidence without risking the case, which can make the outside world read silence as incompetence when it may be about protecting strategy. Guys, and we discussed that so many times. The media gets so entitled with, you got to be transparent, freedom of the press. And it's like, stop. We're doing an investigation right now. And the media, you're not part of the need to know. I'm sorry. You're not part of it. And I can't manage trying to worry about Nancy and all this other stuff, and then trying to balance what we say to the media. And then in the effort to try to balance what you say to the media, it may not come out perfect because you're not saying what you want to say. You're saying what you have to say. And then eventually the media does their work, finds out something that may not be 100% what you said before. Now you're spending more time trying to backpedal. But again, you can't fully correct it because they're not meant to know it. I get this all the time working in the correction setting. Something happens, family wants to know more. You know more, but you can't say it, but they keep pushing. And the problem is then when you don't tell them, they interpret it their way, which I'm sure the media would. Then they go back and they find, oh, you lied. I didn't lie. You're not in the position to know. And then the shifting message. Some early statements have been walked back. All right, so Russ, the question I got here is in a case that may eventually rely on circumstantial evidence and possibly no body, how damaging are these early crime scenes and coordination issues to a future prosecution, and can prosecutors realistically overcome them? Now, I got to ask this in context, Russ, because you've done this before. I mean, we work in corrections. We responded to scenes where you have to preserve the life immediately, and at that point, to be honest with you, even though you're not going in callous, you're not indifferent to the chance that you're not indifferent to the fact that you're entering a crime scene, but all eyes are going to be focused, number one, on that preservation of life. And at that point, you're not going in with the same amount of energy devoted to two. This one is going to be the priority. And then later on, I'm not trying to destroy a crime scene, but later on, we'll have to figure that out and then take note of what could have been done by the first responders and what was originally possibly part of the scene, because preservation of life is always number one. And I think that when they came onto the scene, they were battling the preservation of life, and then eventually it became the preservation of life because she still hasn't been found, and now preparing for what could be, if they ever find somebody, a case where there's no body to be found.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things to this. First of all, just so people know, circumstantial evidence is really actually the best evidence. Might there be a point at which we might have people who are witnesses to the actual thing testifying against each other? That's certainly possible. I think that the forensic evidence, which is a type of circumstantial evidence, is going to be the thing that eventually carries the day here. I feel like they will get to the point where they identify at least one or more people with that. When people are responding to a situation, yeah, that's the point at which report writing becomes important, because you have to identify what you did and what may have been affected, within the confines of any particular incident. So that is key too. I guess at some point, if we're lucky, we will see a prosecution in this, and hopefully they will have all their ducks in a row, and they will have identified what could have been changed. One of the things that will be important as well is when Nancy's family initially entered the scene, they didn't know they were going into a crime scene, but what did they do? What did they do that might have impacted that scene? And they should have already been very well debriefed with regards to that, so that investigators knew, so that they knew potentially where certain pieces of evidence might have strayed to, and or what could have been destroyed or altered in the process.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying, Russ, because circumstantial evidence, as we've been doing true crime now. Really fully now for maybe half a year, I think, and I'm learning things as we go. Circumstantial evidence seems to be a lot of used in a lot of cases. I think we see with the Emmanuel Harrow case, because we haven't found him yet. But I will say this: circumstantial evidence usually stems from some level of foundational evidence. So ultimately, the weight of the evidence still leans on some strong anchor. I believe so. It's not just stuff that's just in the wind without nothing connecting it to something viable. So I still think, in the end, it may be circumstantial evidence, but it's connected to stronger pieces of the case that can make you start adding things. So I think, as Russ said, and Russ, I don't know if you would agree, usually if they're going to lean on circumstantial evidence, it's not the first thing they're leaning on. They're connecting to something foundational, which is a little bit harder to dispute. And then they're trying to branch off that to build clarity and add more weight to whatever that anchor is.
Well, yeah, I think so. I think, there can be, categories and subcategories. The reason, everyone, always gets in there and they say, well, it's just circumstantial. Well, circumstantial can get prosecutors, over the reasonable doubt faster than a lot of things. If you look at like witness testimony is notoriously unreliable. So it just kind of, depends on what you're presented with. But often circumstantial evidence, are things that, are really hard for defense attorneys to get around. A lot of these things now have fallen into all of these subcategories, that are, circumstantial with regards to things that are falling on the electronic forensic side and the physical forensic side and the genealogical forensic side. if you look at if they did, and I'm sure that they did some sort of geofence with regards to this, and they did get a phone ping, and eventually they arrest someone that they could tie back to that. That's going to be a powerful bit of circumstantial evidence. So it's not de minimis in nature. It's actually, a great lead. It's a further foundation.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that we definitely see 100% in the same direction. So now, remember, guys, this was an investigation that preservation of life. Nancy, we still haven't found her. At the very beginning, there was a lot more hope that she was still alive and that they were waiting for the negotiation to see what they could do. Now, as time moves forward, I mean, I hope she's still alive, but you got to bear for the fact that she may not be. And even the family's starting to see it that way a little bit too. But remember, they were working on the pressure of time, because if they feel that the hostage is still alive, time is of the essence. So they are not just moving with the pressure of time, they're moving with a surprise element, because in that end, if let's say they believe Russ has her, they're going to go in aggressively, because as soon as they go in, Russ has the leverage of the hostage, and then there's also a concern that I still think if this was a case of panic, the body does become a liability. That's why there was no effort to negotiate. But if you treat it as if it was an official kidnapping, the pressure of time matters. And that's what got me very upset with the news, because the pressure of time partnered with, they need to have the surprise element. If they don't have the surprise element within that pressure of time, then the end result does not go in their favor, because all that's happening now is the people that are watching, that are involved, who are definitely watching the news, if this was something that was planned to do, which I wouldn't understand what their end result was at this point. Looks like there's no communication. But let's just say it was a planned kidnapping, and let's just say there is a plan in motion. We don't know what the plan is yet, 30 days in or 28 days in. You're feeding them, the news is feeding them everything they need to eliminate that element of surprise. And Russ, just from a tactical standpoint, Russ, and this is definitely your expertise, if law enforcement doesn't have the element of surprise, would you automatically think, I know this is how I think in my world in corrections, then if law enforcement can't maintain the element of surprise, then ultimately we're reacting, and therefore the power goes strictly to the people who are doing the negative acts?
An intelligence standpoint, when media becomes your counterintelligence asset, then surprise or no surprise, or the direction that the investigation is going, it becomes compromised. And if it becomes compromised, then there's a chance to initiate counter forensics, or to flee further from the scene, or to get rid of the body, or to kill the hostage, whatever that looks like. In this case, I feel comfortable with saying is that the media became an actual counter surveillance source for the kidnappers. And so I think that, just take away from that what you will.
No, I agree. I agree with that 100%. And I think that's something that has been getting me upset with the media lately. And I wish the public would see more of that. The people that are putting stuff up and every little thing, they do it under the guise that I'm giving the public before. I'm giving the public their information. My loyalty is to the public. I'm making sure they get all the information they need. But where's the filter in the middle that gives respect to the people that are doing the investigation, that doesn't want that out in the public, that actually causes more confusion? I even said, even with the reward I get at the $1 million, but that's going to cause more leads that may not be correct. And I think it's a smart move from the Guthrie family to keep resources where they need to be. In their case, they may think, you know what, I know people are starting to leave, put the $1 million in. I'm sure that's where Pima County may have said, hey, before you do that, let's think about this, because they're getting ready to back down a little bit, maybe limit resources, still keep the case active. It's not cold, but limit resources. But then you put $1 million reward, and now you're getting bombarded with all these leads. And my biggest concern is, if you don't really have a direction that this case is going, the leads can become very, very confusing because you don't know how to weed them out, because we don't know if this is relevant or not relevant, because we don't understand. We're yet to figure out what the actual motive is. I mean, that at that point, I think that's extremely important. Why is she not there? What were they trying to accomplish? But let me get to the next part. So let's see. So aggressive tactics are colliding with civil liberties concerns and optics, because you saw that happening when they were law enforcement not doing enough. Then they start acting on leads that probably make sense to get signed off by the warrants, whether federal or state or county. The leads that maybe a ping at a certain hour from the phone or whatever it is. But then the media is quick to jump on the people that have been detained and make them look like victims. Now you got lawyers that are representing a few of them. So you got SWAT raids on Luke Daly and his mother, 2 SWAT-style raids and search warrants. They were detained and released without charges. Then you got the attorney blasting law enforcement. Attorney Chris Shalepi says he is absolutely sure his clients has no link and criticizes high-profile raids with no charges. It's funny because this is where it becomes difficult. They got leads that are leading them to these people. And when the media starts interviewing them, like the people that were once detained and now they're released, the media wants to know what those questions were that was asked. What are the leads? Because they want that information, which law enforcement's going to be very protective with. They may detain somebody and not ask them anything. They're just holding them there until they can try to figure it out and then let the person go. Well, they didn't ask me one question. Well, they're very careful when they ask you a question because they know that you may go to the media with the questions we're asking, and these are questions that have to be protected. So before they get to a point where they may interview and interrogate, they may just hold the person there for a moment. We can, and let's figure this out. And then later on say, you know what, you can go. Well, you don't even ask me anything, not risking it. Because if I ask you something, the media will be all over you. And next thing you know, you're putting out information that truly messes with the case. So I think they were holding people because it is about preservation of life, and then maybe letting them go without asking questions that may be relevant because they realize that there's no way this person could be who they are, but we didn't want to sit on it just in case this was the person who had Nancy. But then the news pushes on the need for urgency, pushes on a decision that's made in a fluid moment, and then judges that decision, then covers. These are not questions that they ask of curiosity. These are questions that they ask of judgment. Then they go back and they talk about, how wrong it was to, detain this person. They had nothing. Stop. You're not going to be able to do what needs to be done without, unfortunately, pissing a few people off. Sad to say, but it's the truth. Now you got collateral damage patterns. Delivery driver earlier was detained and released. Now the Daly family as well. Maldonado morale. Deputies feel guilty by association about negative coverage while still working hard. I agree with that. And that only becomes discouraging. And by the way, and I'm sure Russ will touch on this when I ask the question, the more that law enforcement is being judged by their actions, the more hesitant they become. And that's when they wind up missing a secure lead. Because before we go after them, God forbid we get sued again because the media is pushing it all out there. Let's hold off, make sure we are 100% right. And in cases like this, when you make a decision, you're never going to be 100% right. You're making a decision in an evolving complex problem. You're lucky to be 2% right. And Sergeant Cross on warrants, he explains in general that search warrants must meet probable cause thresholds reviewed by prosecutors and judges, but officers are legally barred from commenting on why specific people were targeted, which leaves a vacuum critics fill. And the question I have here, Russ, is, that's question 4. Hold on one second. We're on question 5. We now have SWAT targets attorneys. Okay, we now have SWAT targets attorneys. So these are the people that were targeted by SWAT, saying their clients are collateral damage, and a former deputy calling key decisions unprofessional. Where's the line between necessary aggressive tactics and overreach that actually hurts both the public and the case?
I think that, the line is drawn within the 4 corners of whatever the search warrant said. If there was a link or something that was an indicator and that was time sensitive, time sensitivity tends to grant a lot more latitude towards actions like this. You can like it or not like it, but the fact of the matter is they are responding to a potential situation, and we see the use and abuse of this by citizens, who swat other citizens and things like that. Law enforcement is required to act on the information that they have at the time, and it's a safety issue. It's very time sensitive, and so they did this. And we can agree or disagree, but I think that if they have this information and there's something that looks substantive, and they've met some threshold of reasonable suspicion or probable cause, and those are two different standards. They are given a degree of latitude with regards to acting on that. And so if they just said, well, you know what, we need more evidence, and then in the meantime, Nancy was killed by that person, then what are people going to say? This is a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. So I would just say, give them some latitude to work, and allow them to be able to rule suspects in, rule suspects out, and follow the leads wherever they may go.
Russ, you made a great point, because the media would play both sides as they're doing. They want more urgency. Then they're all over the people that were targeted for whatever reason they were targeted. Some could be just, it's another story to cover. Some could be, I want to know what they're asking. And then, like you said, the element of surprise. I mean, I think I want to mention this too, Russ, and I'm sure you would agree with this. I think they also could be moving so quick because another element that provides pressure is they may be concerned of something getting leaked out, that they're going to go in this direction. So they can't wait too long. So imagine I got a person that maybe got some connection to Nancy, however minimal, but possible. It's possible. Like Russ said, it's possible. Now I'm going to push for this. And I bet you one of the things I would probably say in pushing for this is, guys, it's possible, but I want to mention, if we're going to do it, we got to do it now, because if the media finds out about this, they're going to put the story out there, and then we lose all element of surprise. So I'll guarantee you a big pressure comes from also the media and law enforcement's concerned that someone from the media, because there could be a leak, unfortunately, will pick it up, and now you lose that element of surprise.
Absolutely. It's, surprise is key. And, having to act within the confines of a potential leak or a potential loss or a potential fleeing of the individuals involved, are all ingredients. And does it make for suboptimal acts by law enforcement? Yes, it does. But what else are you going to do?
I love what you just said. Suboptimal act. I mean, to be honest with you, in a live case like this, Russ, where life is number one, and you're learning things as you go, what is truly going to be the best choice? I don't have 100% information, so you could look at me later on and judge me, but the best choice may be that suboptimal act.
Yeah,
I love that.
Things are imperfect. We're never acting on perfect knowledge. We're never acting on perfect intelligence. And things within the law enforcement realm, are often, going at, speeds beyond where you can calculate any kind of, optimal outcome or optimal action or anything else. Sometimes you just have to, try to preserve life. And, you go in, and these events, they're rapidly evolving, rapidly unfolding, and it's a very difficult thing to be able to get in there and act on, and you're always going to be judged after the fact.
Yeah, and guys, I like to see things as a spectrum, like likelihood, probability, and then definitive. And I think right now, when you're trying to figure out what's happening in real time, you are going to act on what's likely until eventually you start narrowing it down. Now, this is what's probable. I like to see probable as more definitive than likely. And then the next level would be now with definitive. Now we start bringing things in. But I think this is the effort to go through the likelihood, because like Russ said, you can't sit on it, because what about if the likelihood was definitive? So scaling down the visible footprint. Now, this is recent. And I want people to know it doesn't mean they're giving up. It doesn't mean it's cold. It just means they're scaling down the resources. So refocusing detectives. Sheriff says they're refocusing resources to detectives specifically assigned to this case, with staffing fluctuating as leads open and close. So they're giving the resources to a limited amount of detectives who are handling the case instead of spread out. FBI pulling back. Many agents returned to Phoenix. The core still remains in Tucson. Remember that Maldonado, the interview I watched, he said that calls this normal. Can't keep all your resources in that one bucket. Garrett, he mentioned about a prosecutor walkthrough. He said U.S. attorney staff toured the home so they can later explain the physical layout to a jury. Garrett also mentioned on an interview I watched him in on scaling back. He said large cases routinely move from all hands to a smaller core team over time. That's how it evolves. And Sergeant Cross, when he was talking about safe communication on duty, Ron, he emphasized they're trying to be case safe and professional, share enough process to reassure the public without telegraphing investigative strategy or burning future warrants. And this is not done at TV show speed. Garrett reminds viewers real cases move slower than TV, with DNA and leads taking weeks and months. He said, believe it or not, 30 days is still not bad. So question 6, Russ, and 3 more questions after this. When you see prosecutors being, hold on. Where is that one? So I had that one. Did I have something here twice? Okay, so I missed. I'm going to have to read this question to you, Russ, because I did one question twice. Okay, so let me read this question to you. So when you see prosecutors being walked through the house and hear about refocusing resources, do you see that as a healthy phase shift in a big case, or a sign they're quietly transitioning from a rescue mode into building a long-term prosecution file? Oh, you're muted, Russ.
I just think that there's going to be, different phases because of, the long-term nature of this case. So as they go along, they're going to, deal with the evidence that they have. And this is going to become just a grind. This is going to be a thing that's going to have to be built out over time. And they're settling in for the long haul. You can't have this level of frenetic activity and extend it indefinitely because there's a point at which it just becomes, counterproductive, because there's simply not enough leads to go on.
All right, hold on. Just got some more notes. So, Russ, I did a video on handing over the house, which I think is natural transition. A lot of people were saying the news ran with something crazy, that handing over the house, they started equating that to no body and circumstantial. I didn't see the connection on that, so I did a whole video on just disconnecting that. I didn't want that to run like wildfire, so I just talked about the normal process of handing over a crime scene. Obviously, we're very familiar with that in the prison world. It may not be as big of a crime scene, but obviously, administrative wise, we do deal with crime scenes almost probably daily, to be honest with you. So we understand how it works. We understand bringing the investigators in, bringing the prosecutor's office in. We're pretty familiar. I'm definitely been familiar with that process. So I just, in the video I did, I just want people to know, guys, I don't know where this connection's going to, but let's just talk about the process and why that's an inevitable process. That's why they did what they call a final sweep. Now it's the feds and probably Pima County finally working together, and then hopefully making that release. Because that would be the first time we saw them together doing that, by the way. Okay, so talking about luck, skill, or incompetence, or all the above. Okay, so on day 27 to 28, which we're at now, Everything we discussed is now interacting. So you got the offender with a head start, good timing, possible scouting, plus early confusion and scene issues. Offender mistakes that haven't paid off yet, maybe DNA on a glove, visible features on the surveillance camera, maybe some level of distinctive clothing. And it's funny how the one reporter said that Pima County has no names. And he tries to say, but they had a list of 40 names. No. They have no names of a definitive suspect. The 40 names, which they try to keep private, was one, protect the investigation, but also protect the people who are names are on there that could just be on there for a small connection. So it's crazy how they'll jump on people if the media moves too quick on a name, but yet they want to know the names. I wish people could see this. Clock running against investigators. We talked about that. Evidence degrades, communication goes stale. Remains, if any, become harder to find and interpret. So, Russ, I think this should be question 7. Yeah, this should be question 7, but it says question 6. Given everything we laid out, the offender's planning and mistakes and the investigation's missteps and SWAT raids on the wrong people, how would you divide the blame pie for why we're almost a month out with no suspect, if there is something to blame? These questions are don't come from me, they get submitted to me.
The problem with assigning blame at this point is that all of the information that comes with regards to problems in the investigation stems wholly from the media. There's been no independent report being done on this. It's just all noise and no substance. So when you look at it from that perspective, I don't think that we can say, it's easy for people out there to jump on the bandwagon and then reference, even if they don't say it out loud, what TMZ did or what CNN did or what, this, that, or the other organization did and said, and why, all these investigators are, fill in the expletive word that you want to fill in there. So I don't think it's fair at this point to, actually start pointing fingers, because so much of it is just self-referencing from the journalists and the media. Because let me tell you, all of those people know better. And if they'd been put in charge, they would have got results. It's ridiculous. It's infantile. And it's unfortunately the current state of the way things are with regards to instances like this.
And guys, by the way, Russ is so correct. That's why they lean on these crazy sources, these resources, because they don't have enough credibility. Plus, it alleviates liability for them. And then the people that go on their show are going to give them the same narrative that they want, and the people do it because they want the airtime. I mean, you should see me. The one time I went on CNN and the lady kept on calling us guards, and I corrected her live on air. Never was on a show again. You know what I mean? I was never on a show again. She called us guards. I said correctional officer. I apologize, but it's correctional officers. They have a narrative, and they have to be wary. I got Tubin pissed off. There's a show on that where they were creating this narrative, and I went against it, but I did get the support from Anderson Cooper, which was pretty cool. I got a chance to, I know he may have his political views, but he treated me fairly, and I'm not judging people from having their perspective. My biggest thing is when that limited perspective condescends to people who really do the work. That's all I care about. If you have a perspective, that's fine, but let's grow from the perspective. Let's not stay resistant to each other. If I believe one thing and you believe another, then that invites a great conversation for us to have, but not to be enemies, but to find some ground that we could meet in the middle. And most of the time it comes from understanding. It really does. Because if you have a limited perspective and you're only talking to like-minded people, all that does is fuel ignorance. But if I don't agree with Russ on something, then me and Russ need to figure this out, because somewhere along the line, one of us don't understand the other person's perspective, and that's where you start moving from extremes to the what matters in the middle. Most people don't want to have that dialogue. Why? Because they're afraid they'll lose viewers, or they're afraid they'll lose votes. But most of the time you're fueling it. You go out there and fuel the one perspective, you're creating the Frankenstein, and now you got to keep it fed. All right, last two parts of this case. So We're in a long, quiet, evidence-driven phase. So DNA and genetic genealogy. So multiple DNA profiles are being analyzed. A clean unknown profile may be pushed through genetic genealogy pipelines. There was a guy, we talked about Garrett on DNA Reality. I was watching a show interview that he did. He goes, at least 2 DNA sources, home and glove. So first question is whether either actually belongs to the offender. Then you got the reward-driven tips, combined reward of over 1 million, probably 1.2 and change, meant to trigger someone close to the offender to talk. And I'm sure that's it is a great move in some extent where it could cause a divide between if there was a panic or not a planned taking of someone's life or taking the person, then that could be something that motivates somebody to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and release some information, because not even just about the money, but it wasn't supposed to go this far anyway. Because you notice she gives the money and then she gives the plea to kind of turn yourself around. Even law enforcement has done that, because there's got to be someone, if there's more than one person, maybe it's someone in the group that this went too far. So Garrett said, unfortunately, most tips will be noise. A small percentage will tie specific to testable leads. Clothing and gear recognition, Ozark Trail backpack, holster, mask, gloves as recognition hooks. Vehicle video and license plate readers. They're showing videos of cars that are about a little outside the 2-mile range that everybody's trying to connect with time, and then the media runs with it. Again, I don't think that's been released by law enforcement. So car and ring video could become powerful when cross-referenced with other cameras and LPR data like license plate recognition. Sergeant Cross on what public can do. He urges people to review any cameras they have from the relevant dates, report anything that feels off rather than trying to solve it themselves, and avoid publicly naming suspects based on rumor, and language shift as a tell. A move from missing, kidnapped to homicide or presumed dead would signal a major reclassification. So Russ, question 8 is looking at where we are nearly a month in. Do you think the breakthrough is more likely to come from the lab, from a human tip triggered by the reward and images, or from new tech work on vehicle, video, and license plate data? You're muted, Russ.
I think that from everything we've seen so far, that most likely the next big lead is going to come from DNA. I think that the license plate reader thing at this point can only be really used going backwards. They didn't get any fresh tips off of it. They may find something later that points to something that comes from something else, actually. I think that what's going to happen is assuming the DNA that they got from the house is valid, legitimate, and is actually that of the subject, that they will be able to build out from that, get their family tree, narrow it down, and be able to act on it. But that's a consequence of not being in the loop and not knowing for sure what that particular bit of DNA that they got looks like. What could happen at a later point is when some of this dies down, someone that these people talk to or one of their inside people may provide a tip, leading probably to the body that may get them some of this, remuneration that Savannah Guthrie has offered. But I don't think that right now that they have anything else in range that really looks promising.
I agree with you, unless they're telling us stuff we don't know. I'm trying to have a genealogist on, but saw a Kohlberger, was it the Golden State Killer? I think they looked at him too as well. I was watching a special on him the other day. He's the one, I believe, put the plates on people's backs, if I remember right. Is that the gentleman? He's the one that when they he would take them hostage, or in the house, I mean, he would put the plates on their back, so if they moved, he would hear it. I watched a great special on it. It was a Golden State Killer, right? Is that Italian name? D'Angelo? Yeah, that's the one.
Something like that.
Yeah, I was watching something on that. But genealogy could be, that's how they call it. Is it Kohlberger? But now the problem is they said it takes time. I mean, while you're doing it, you got to kind of go through this whole big tree. Some of them could lead in different directions. If you have adoptions that could be in there, people with the same name. So it's definitely a process, and could take months to years. All right, last question, Russ. Last roundabout is the human fallout. So collateral damage to uninvolved families. A family described as scared, numb after being wrongly swept into online theories. So that's possibly about Annie Guthrie, Tommaso Cioni, the husband of Annie Guthrie. Investigators versus noise, tens of thousands of tips, many driven by social media. One officer, Maldonado, on communication, he says regular unified briefings, even no news updates, would have been better than scattered interviews. And Sergeant Cross on echoing that balance. He talks about the tension between transparency and protecting the integrity of an active case, explaining why some questions simply can't be answered in real time without hurting the investigation and the future trial risk. Defense can later argue jurors were exposed to months of speculation and misinformation. So the last question I have here is, how much is the online true crime ecosystem with all the speculation, misidentifications, and accusations? Because remember, Ashley Banfield put out that it was the husband of Annie, her son, Nancy's son-in-law, and that went like wildfire, and there was really no evidence there, and I don't know if there still is. Helping versus hurting this investigation, and what risk does it create for any eventual trial? Let's think long-term now.
So I think that the way that all of that looks and adds up, and just like going through the social media posts and seeing, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who have, in their mind, identified who the suspect actually is, and that it's always somebody close to Nancy, it's always somebody close to Savannah. And they stick with that through thick and thin, regardless of the evidence at hand. And then it just becomes this self-perpetuating, vicious circle that the media just, engaged in this big three-ring circus with regards to this stuff. And so now, could you have a tainted jury pool and everyone is an expert on what's going on? Yeah, there's the potential for that. There's the potential that somewhere in all of this, a real lead has been buried. How do you go through thousands and thousands of leads? Well, you give 10 or 15 seconds to each one. And then, as soon as it's a dead end, rather than persevere on and put your nose to the grindstone, you got to go to the next one. So all in all, I would say, the media gets an F plus from me in all of this.
I wish more people would see it that way. I really do. I wish more people will see it that way. For me, I just think in the long, I can erase this question now. I think, there was a battle here. Obviously, the got to get Nancy, and then maybe eventually if we find somebody to make sure there's enough evidence and we don't mess with the due process to eliminate the possibility of holding people accountable. But at this point here, I think the longer the time goes, does the pressure now go towards still finding Nancy, or do they put more towards not going towards Nancy, but more towards preparing for defense? It's tough. If you don't, I mean, they're looking for the suspect in an effort to find Nancy. Maybe eventually, God forbid, we lose Nancy, it'll solely be looking for the suspect. But I think it does matter at some point of what the priority is. If I'm looking for the suspect to find Nancy, then my priority is trying to figure out where she is, rescue or recover. But if now I'm solely looking for the suspect, I think now it becomes purely prosecution driven. Does that make sense, Russ?
Yeah, but if that happens, if there's a transition from a recovery of any kind, good or bad, it will definitely shift to that. I think, though, right now it's just going to be the long haul. I think that, probably in the course of the next 3, 4, 5 months, they will probably have a break. But, I hope it comes sooner rather than later. But all indications at this point, to me, and the way that I look at this case is that, it's already, past whatever amount of time that she had left with her captors.
Well, for the final thought, I have this here, give it to you. I don't think I've ever. This may be a little bit more of a personal thought, but if you had the Guthrie family right here, right in front of you, and they gave you a chance to say a few things to them, and this would be our closing thoughts for today, what would you tell them? What would you be able to try to do to help them go through this, if possible, to manage? Or I don't know. I don't want to say go through this time, but to manage what they're dealing with right now.
I think that they're right now that they are at a point where lacking any forward movement in the case, that they simply, turn inward and they look at themselves with regards to the healing that they have to do. I would be very reticent to tell them to give up hope because that's a very difficult thing to do. No matter how realistic it may be from my point, I wouldn't want to saddle them with that, but I would just, encourage them to, look inward and pray, because I know that they must feel certainly helpless and powerless, and experience a real lack of control with regards to the way things are. So their own prayers and their own good mental health, for lack of a better term here, is going to be paramount towards them being able to carry things forward. And I think that they just have to look inward for a little while on those things to try and establish themselves in a way that allows them to go the long distance. I've seen supposedly Savannah, is going to be going back on the air. I think that that's maybe the healthiest thing for her, but I don't know. And so that's the only thing that I would say. Like I say, I think I would be really reticent to try and say, hey, give up all hope. Because, that's simply not what families do. But I do think that they need to, look inward and try and find some peace as they move forward at the same time.
Yeah, I did a quick little short. Oh, sorry. Where am I? There you go. I did a quick little short, 2 minutes, but this was it relates to closure. It's actually doing pretty good in views. I wanted to read this. I wanted you guys to see this just to kind of close off my thoughts. I think it plays out here. Hey guys, people have asked. Hey guys, I want to bring something back up to the forefront that I think hasn't been brought into the forefront for a while, and it's Celeste Rivas Hernandez family.
Oh wait, no, hold on, guys.
What they're going.
Let me just do it this way, because this
I think when you go to do a YouTube short, it brings it just doesn't go to the video you want to see for some reason. But this is the video right here. I think I did a whole video on the family. The family, what they have to be going through. But this is the video that I feel relates to Savannah Guthrie and her future, because this is definitely something being asked that's actually doing very good on my shorts, but I want to reiterate it here. So here's my final thoughts in closing. Hey guys, people have asked me a question. Do I think that Savannah Guthrie will go back on the Today Show? And to be honest, it's really not for me to answer. Only she knows. But I could talk generally about not having closure. I think I could touch on that. So closure helps us move forward. And sometimes we are willing to accept even the worst of news so we can have the freedom to move forward. Now, with that said, what does that mean when I say freedom? I know in some cases when there isn't closure, especially in a case like this, there could be a level of guilt that somewhere along the line you are living your life and the person you love the most can be in harm's way. We just don't know. So some people look at moving forward without closure as selfish. And it makes sense. It makes sense. And also, we don't know the true motive behind what happened here. I mean, could there be a chance that it does connect to Savannah? Does that have to be revisited? So there's a lot in play here when it comes to her going back and hosting the Today Show. It's not going to be, in my mind, a simple decision. I wouldn't expect any movement forward until there's closure. This is the, when I cover these missing cases, these are one of the things that matter the most to the family is they want closure, and a lot of them never move on because they can't. I think the feeling of guilt is so powerful that it stops them from taking a step forward and putting their own life on track. So I just wanted to say it's tough. Without closure, sometimes it's hard to move forward. But you never know. That's just my opinion in dealing with closure in general. But I would love your thoughts. All right, guys, stay safe. The only thing I would add to that is one thing I was thinking about when I was driving, but I forgot to add in this was guilt and frustration. I don't know if they play at the same time, if one leads to the other. I know guilt is a big thing because when you ask a lot of people that have someone that's missing that they haven't found, they feel guilty if they enjoy a moment because they know that their loved one could still be out there. So the closure, even in death, can alleviate a burden of just not knowing. But there's also times where they could also feel extremely frustrated because maybe they want to move forward, but they can't, and their own guilt is holding them back, and they get frustrated on so many things. They get frustrated on what has happened, frustrated on themselves because they know at this point they're limited, they can't do nothing, and they just can't free themselves to move forward. So I don't know how you are able to resolve all this, but if I could say something to the family, the only thing I would say is guilt, frustration, these are normal feelings to have, and you have to address them head on. I just hope that somewhere along the line, however closure comes, you find the closure you need to move forward and continue to be successful. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Don't forget, we have Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. Link to that for both me and Russ is in the description of this video. You'll see mine, then Russ is below that. And more content to come. Maybe me and Russ will see what other cases are out there. If you guys are interested in us cover other cases, email us at ganjianthony@yahoo.com, or Russ' email is, Russ, what's your email?
Sierra.sargent@gmail.com.
Yep. And we'll see if we have a chance to explore it. As always, guys, stay safe.